Welcome to the Shared Value Initiative Speaker Series. My name is Felix. I'm a Managing Director at FSG, a not-for-profit social impact consulting firm seeking to drive equitable systems change with philanthropic and private sector clients. The Shared Value Initiative is one of 3 initiatives housed within FSG, and it provides a global platform for leaders seeking to address societal challenges with business solutions. Today, I am thrilled to host our speaker series focused on the role of corporate social innovation and organizational transformation to achieve equitable outcomes. As we all know, with global inequality rising across health, housing, food security, and other dimensions, the private sector is being called on to take a pivotal leadership role. A societal push towards greater access and equity has spurred leaders across industries to commit and act with renewed purpose, urgency, and innovative thinking. We are just beginning to see entire industries shift in response to these social and environmental pressures, and companies rethink their approach to business, looking to ensure they keep in mind all stakeholders as they make decisions and affect change for employees, communities, the environment, and not solely their investors. For instance, in the financial services, an industry that has historically been known to harm communities, now business leaders are focusing on strategies that address those very same systemic barriers, with the aim to accelerate access to economic opportunity through financial tools and solutions that help build wealth for those same communities. Within the healthcare space, companies are going beyond their core remit to think through categorically how to address social determinants of health and support the comprehensive well-being of populations. Across industries, particularly energy companies and new enterprises, are committing to net zero emissions and working with local communities to bring power to the world in a way that is clean, reliable, and affordable, and expands access and opportunity and ensures a just transition. I'm sure many of you saw the recent news about Patagonia's transformative declaration that Earth is now their primary stakeholder, and opportunities for other business leaders to reimagine their brand purpose in such a way. As the moral imperative and business case for equity become clearer, some leading executives are setting objectives that call for industry-wide change to ensure greater access and outcomes for stakeholders. At FSG, we co-founded the Corporate Racial Equity Alliance with PolicyLink and Just Capital to support and advise companies in their efforts to become equitable corporations that can contribute effectively to building a just, equitable, and healthy society for all. For our webinar today, we'll hear from leaders from Abbott, Pearson, and the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation about what it's like to help bring those ideas to life within a transforming organization and environment. The reality is that innovating for greater equity is often challenging, and the how you lead change within a company, how you pilot, how you test and innovate to discover new approaches is just as important as to why you're leading these changes. From this session, you will learn a few things. First, how getting into relationship with a problem, whether around healthcare, education, et cetera, and the people it impacts leads to more meaningful innovation. Second, how important it is to have an opportunity mindset to deliver greater outcomes for society and business. And lastly, the responsibilities of leadership and governance required to shift narratives and enable the conditions for real and lasting change within and outside a corporation. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to thank the sponsors of the Shared Value Initiative Speaker Series: Discovery, Enel, Merck, Truist, Walmart, Abbott, Sanofi, and 3M. Through their generous support, we're able to make the programming available to the general public free of charge. We greatly value the support of our sponsors and their commitment to advancing more equitable outcomes for society. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's session. First, I want to introduce Kathryn McKenzie, Divisional Vice President of Global Citizenship and Sustainability at Abbott, a medical devices and healthcare company. In this role, Kathryn is dedicated to helping find ways to deliver long-term impact for the greatest number of people, removing barriers to health equity and strengthening communities. Second, I'd love to invite Paul Ellingstad, Managing Partner of PTI Advisors, recently serving as an ESG and Purpose Advisor to Pearson. the world's leading learning company with a mission to add life to a lifetime of learning. Paul helps leaders, teams, and organizations effectively navigate change and thrive at the nexus of business and society. Last but not least, our moderator today, Noah Gaffney, the Executive Director of the Rutgers Institute for Corporate Social Innovation, housed within the Rutgers Business School. The Institute is focused on the role of business in society and is committed to turning out future generations prepared for social innovation that can improve the world. We have reserved some time for audience questions, so please use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and we'll do our best to get us to as many as we can. With that in mind, Noah, I'm going to hand it off to you, and we'll be back to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirley, and thank you all for tuning in. It's wonderful to be here with you all today, talking about the nexus of equity, innovation, transformation in this particularly challenging global time. So over the past few years, the world has faced a number of, frankly, shocks. The COVID-19 pandemic, which very few people saw coming, has really upended the way that we work and live, but also highlighted extreme inequities in healthcare, health systems, not just in the United States, but also globally. We've also seen increased awareness of the structural racial inequities that have existed for many, many years, but have really come to the fore more recently. And of course, when we think about the geopolitical context, it's hard to ignore the intersection of the environment and the war in Ukraine. And so there are a number of factors, not just impacting society today, but also how corporations can react. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Paul and Kathryn. I'm curious, how are you both seeing the challenges that are facing the world today? And do you see them as both either a risk or an opportunity from a corporate standpoint?
Well, hey, a warm welcome to everybody who's tuning in, and maybe I can kick it off, Paul, and then you can take it from there. You know, I think to what you just said, Noah, you know, there are so many challenges right now, and I'm sure a number of people who are listening are facing the same thing of trying to balance kind of this short-term, very acute need. There's tremendous humanitarian need with long-term sustainable thinking, like what is going to get us beyond the challenges today. And I think as we think about healthcare, the pandemic really underscored some of the systemic challenges in healthcare that were longstanding before the pandemic. You know, there were huge disparities in access to care, and we saw the pandemic just further widen those gaps that were existing. I want you to share a number that really stuck out for me. A third of the people on the planet right now lack access to essential health products and technologies. And that is something that accounts for an 18-year difference in life expectancy between some of the richer and poorer countries. And we're hearing right now that coming out of these past 2 years, that life expectancy has declined in many countries for the first time after several years of progress. So as we have been thinking about that, you know, Abbott, from a healthcare and a health technology standpoint, we've really been thinking about how do you address that, along with, you know, the increasing debt burden and the immense budget deficits that are going to limit funding for health, as well as this growing need for healthcare workers. By 2030, we're going to be lacking about 20 million healthcare workers in the world. So that thinking is really what preceded, for us, the pandemic, as we put together our 2030 sustainability plan, with that sort of long-term thinking about how is it that with our purpose as a company and as the way that we look at these challenges, we can really best address them, you know, for the long term and in a sustainable way. And, you know, at the heart of our plan, which is probably why I'm invited to talk here today, you know, we really thought about innovating for access and affordability. That, you know, sort of singular thought that the best healthcare solution is going to be the one that reaches the most people who need it. And so how can we really go about building that, thinking about access and affordability into the way we do business and into our approach? So I'll hand over to Paul and see what he has to add to that.
Thanks, Kathryn. I think to build on that, I first share two words that I think are really important in this context. One is circular and the second is systems. When I think back to when the Shared Value Initiative got started over a decade ago, and I still kind of stop and, and have to catch my breath thinking that it's been over a decade since Mark Kramer and Michael Porter, came up with the concept and really, brought it to market. Many folks like ourselves that were in corporate sustainability or CSR, we're still kind of in this linear approach of the business is running, the business is doing well and growing and making a profit. And then we're thinking about what we're going to, quote unquote, give back to society and what we're going to do for the environment. Fast forward to 2022, and at least for the last 2 years, and I think the pandemic has actually helped with this, we have people realizing that invariably everything's connected. So we're thinking more in a systems approach, we're thinking more in a circular approach. In the education space, again, I think we can all relate to this. We've all, been through school, some maybe back as well. But it was, you go to school, you build skills, and then you move on, you get a job and a career, and you advance. Now we're into 4 or 5 careers in a lifetime, if not more. Constant learning and upskilling. So again, it's not this linear approach. Same with business and and impact on society and the environment. We don't do one thing and then think about the second as a next step. We're doing all of this continuously. And I think that's where, to the question of, do we look at risks or opportunities? Really, it's two sides of the same coin. We've got to be looking at both simultaneously.
And sorry, just picking up on one point that Paul said there, I think with all the challenges we're talking about with the pandemic and how that's accelerated some of the disparities in different areas, we've also seen that it's accelerated some of the solutions. As we talk about risk and opportunity, I was thinking about that as we're all on this virtual conference today. This has become a norm, and there've been tremendous technology advances over the past 2 years, in the same time as some of those kind of ever increasing challenges.
Yeah.
And so let's jump into some of those solutions. I think it's great, Kathryn, that you brought that up in terms of with all of these major challenges, we've had to innovate quickly and think on our feet in ways that perhaps corporations are, not used to doing in their traditional innovation process. So one of the concepts in innovation and in design thinking is really, apprenticing with the problem or really understanding the problem in depth. How have you seen that play out in your work and in your industry and in your company in order to accelerate some of these groundbreaking solutions?
So I'd say one thing on Abbott's side, as we've really thought about those words I just shared around access and affordability with this overall goal of reaching more people, we started by setting a very ambitious goal that we hope to improve the lives of 3 billion people, literally 1 in every 3 people on the planet by 2030. And so to do that, it cannot be business as usual. We need to change the way that we are innovating. And that is going to mean building in those considerations around access and affordability into the design of our products and technologies from the very beginning. We need products that can be cost effective to the user as well as to the entire healthcare system, and that can work in different environments. I think if we've seen anything out of these past 2 years, we have needed to go beyond the walls of the hospitals and the clinics to when and where care is most needed. And I think the other point I'll just raise is, no company, no person can do this alone. Right? So as we think about innovation, we need to be thinking about collaboration, we need to be thinking about partnerships, and really also listening to communities and to the people that need, whether that's in healthcare or in education, to be collaborating and co-creating, what those solutions will be. I'll hand to Paul.
Great, thanks, Kathryn. I'm thinking of the old adage, necessity is the mother of invention. And again, certainly the pandemic, we can go on for hours about, all all of the difficulties, all of the the angst that's created. But from an innovation point of view, it has been positive. Now, thinking specifically about education, let's even extend that to working. I think through lockdowns, there were many that were maybe already the global travelers that, jumping on Zoom. It was, well, we've already been doing that for years, if not decades, what's the big deal? But particularly where you have young workers that are in small apartments working from a kitchen table or down in an apartment lobby, kids working from kitchen tables or bedrooms, it was not simply let's jump onto Zoom and everything's going to be okay. It was a real challenge, but at the same time, I think that we have countless stories from all over the world of how people have kind of dug in and found a way to make it work. Now, that's also more emergency response. That's not, real innovation of transformation. We've had to work through transformation. Even what we have, today with hybrid, I think is part of the, the next step, the next phase, as opposed to crisis management, which we were really in for at least 6 months, if not longer.
So Paul, do you have an example of an innovation in the education space? I'm thinking EdTech, Pearson, anything of that nature in terms of where was the innovation and what was the aha that led to it?
Yeah, I was just going to jump to that. In particular, accreditation, credentialing and even test taking is really, really critical for a company like Pearson. The approach was kind of, old, well, not just for Pearson, for everyone, it was old school. You go in and sit an exam, you're writing on paper and it's being scored, and there's, assessors there, physically in a classroom. All of that had to change. So, the aha moment was, how do we do that? How do we maintain, the integrity, the resilience of doing, assessments, but now doing those online? So, technology played a really critical role in that. The security and the oversight that goes into those connections as well. You don't want someone sitting on their, their home computer and someone, telling them the answers over their, shoulder in that. So there's a lot that went into how do you actually do online credentialing and assessments, that people had to really pull out the stops and figure out how to do that. A lot of examples of that where you're going to sort of a personalized approach to learning and assessment that we simply didn't have before. We put a lot of people in one big room and kind of made sure no one was looking at the other person's paper.
That's a great example. And Kathryn, I'm going to turn to you. You mentioned so many incredible targets and goals that you're working towards. Do you want to share a little bit about not only how that's good for society, but how is that really creating shared value?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can share a couple of examples. I'm going to start with our rapid COVID-19 antigen test, just because of so topical to the situation that we're talking about. But I think right at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we realized that COVID-19 tests were going to be required for different settings than perhaps where traditionally people have been going to get testing, like drive-through testing, schools and workplaces. And so in addition to our laboratory-based and point-of-care COVID tests, we needed to create something that would be highly portable, highly accurate, affordable, easy to treat people, and that could be manufactured in large quantities to reach more people when and where they're needed, including at home. And while we've got years of experience as a diagnostics leader in creating tests, never has there been a need to create one under this kind of time constraint, as fast as it was with these conditions in place. And so we worked on the Binax Now test, which is one of the most popular at home COVID tests. And also then the Navica app, which would allow organizations the ability to quickly and securely send and share testing information so people could confidently return to work and school and other gathering places. We've distributed nearly 1 billion tests around the world in the last year alone, with now rapid test the majority of that volume. And so that's really changed the way I think that we think about testing. And, coming back to what I was talking about before, Binax Now and PineBio are among the lowest priced OTC tests that are available, really trying to respond, to that need. I was just laughing with my colleague, not to do a product placement, but I took one this morning because I've just been traveling. And I'm showing that just because that's at one end of the spectrum of kind of technology and ease of use. Another example I thought might be interesting to people is around our neuromodulation virtual clinic. So neuromodulation, is implantable, both deep brain stimulation and spinal cord for chronic pain, for neuromodulation for movement disorders and Parkinson's disease. And so as part of this kind of remote technology, we have been able to use Bluetooth wireless technology to now communicate with a remote patient to a remote doctor between the implanted device and the user's programming device. And so that's something that now, the doctor can speak to the patient in a different location. It's taking down a barrier right often of traveling. And they're able to prescribe new treatment remotely. They're able to, actually modulate the device from a distance. And so this has, really changed, again, the standard of care, for somebody who is, dealing with a really difficult chronic pain or movement disorder in their life.
These are fantastic examples. And so I just want to turn it back to Paula and see, from an education standpoint, what are some of the shared value examples around access and equity, and how have you seen those transform over the past few years?
It's been a really exciting time. So I spent most of my career in the tech industry. And so the concept of digital transformation kind of felt like we were probably at the front end of that. And oftentimes we would say, healthcare and education are kind of the last frontiers. When you think about public health and public education, well, there's always, pockets of innovation and really cool stuff like what Kathryn just talked about, in the health space, or, a lot of really cool ed tech in the education space. By and far, for most students and patients, it's very old school, if I can say that. So again, it's been really exciting to see that when we go into a shared value model, instead of old style partnerships where it's, let's get laptops or textbooks or even ebooks and just donate them to kids in poorer schools anywhere in the world. Now it's looking at how do we reduce the cost of education, increase the access. One thing that I'm just over the moon about that Pearson did, part of the digital transformation, bringing out Pearson Plus, for college students going from a $300 textbook to a subscription service where, you pay as you go. The affordability model there, it's absolutely turned on its head. Now that's, one example for college students. Again, this bite-sized snackable approach to education. You kind of pay for what you need, even down to the accreditation, makes education far more accessible, far more affordable. But then also, you're able to keep learning in that as well. We've certainly seen what happened in the debate that still goes on about college debt forgiveness. When you have a more affordable approach to education, you have the opportunity to go out to employment, to reskill, to upskill throughout your career, instead of, kind of this one-time big investment, for university in that as well. So there's a lot going on. It's not just technology related. It really is business model related that's making it more affordable and more accessible to literally anyone who wants to learn.
And I think affordability and accessibility are really key when we're talking about some of these structural inequities. And so as these become more top of mind for your organization, would you say this is an evolution or a revolution?
That is a fantastic question. I would say on Abbott's side, it's been an evolution. we're actually a 130-year-old plus company. And so, thinking about innovation and a commitment to sustainability has been a longstanding part of that. That being said, as we really think about shaping the future of healthcare, to everything I just spoke to, we know that we need to evolve that further, and we know that we need to, evolve some of the practices in our way of thinking, particularly as it comes to innovating for access and affordability. I'll love to let Paul answer, and then I'm happy to share a little bit more on how we're going about that.
For me, it's a tough one to answer. I think, evolution has a connotation of a much slower transformation, whereas revolution, I think, is more, a big change. But with revolution, it's also not kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. There's a lot of learning that we're building on that is more about evolution. So maybe, we're learning and adapting as we go, but we're doing it much quicker. So it's maybe a combination of revolution and evolution. I think the timing is really critical, particularly again now. I think we see that the climate crisis is exacerbating so many other issues, to which it's related and interdependent, with healthcare, with education, with economic viability. So we really don't have the time for kind of the slow burn evolution. It's a real crunch on the timing right now to innovate quickly.
Absolutely, Paul. I think that's a great point. It's UN General Assembly Week, as many of you know, and I was at a dinner last night on education, and it was actually a young girl stood up and talked about how her education was impacted in her country by extreme weather. So there was flooding and rain that impacted her ability to get to school for weeks at a time. And of course, this impacted her timeline and her ability to learn in terms of graduating high school. So these are serious examples. And I think you're right, absolutely. These global issues are accelerating and they're interconnected. And there are certainly ways that companies can play a role. And so, Kathryn, as I go back to you with the example, I'm just curious, how are you thinking about mindset and culture, and what role do they play as you're engaging in this evolution or revolution or somewhere along that continuum?
I think they're a huge part of it, to be honest. As we've thought about how we truly embed this thinking about building in considerations of access and affordability from very early on in the design phase, we have put together these design principles that really show our intentionality and say, okay, regardless of which of Abbott's businesses you're in, these are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about, the kind of barriers you need to be anticipating. But it's challenging. We have a breadth of business that spans, nutrition, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, diabetes. So a very diverse healthcare company. And then this is forcing some really important discussions, because if you think about innovation taking investment, trying to drive down costs, how to get broader reach, and then all the things that both of you just spoke to, building in considerations about environmental stewardship, keeping a diverse and resilient supply chain. There's obviously trade-off decisions that need to be made, as you try to put those principles in practice. And so, this is really something that we're committed to as an organization, but from, our top leadership oversight from the board of directors, but it's something that we need to become our business as usual, that we need to embed into everything that we're doing. And, for that, the culture and the mindset shift is a really important part of it.
And so turning back to Paul, you work with senior executives in addition to your previous positions. And so how do you think about the role of senior leadership as well as middle management in driving some of these changes forward?
Yeah, I'll go back to circular. It's old school approach of, the CEO and the board, would kind of set the vision, and, that cascades down. They might even do an all employee, meeting, to share that. And then oftentimes, when it comes to kind of the execution or the implementation, it's actually the middle management that gets kind of pinched between, we have all of these aggressive financial goals and growth, but then we have to, live our values and achieve our vision in that. I think now it's kind of like all hands on deck at the same time, and it's not sort of this sequential rollout, but rather everyone's got to sort of be involved in the design, in the envisioning, and in the creation, but then in rolling it out as well. So I think that, again, the change in the approach really has people kind of a little bit anxious, but also excited that you're not having to wait for the rollout. You're not having to wait for this to be cascaded down. You're a part of it, from the design. I think as well, it's now where it was maybe seen as that dreaded term soft skills, or the soft things. Purpose, again, some might kind of snicker and say, oh, that's kind of the fluffy brand stuff. In reality, that is signposting what you stand for as an organization. And I think we've all seen the research that increasingly not only consumers, but certainly investors too, are looking very, very forensically in this and saying, you say this, but are you actually living it? Where is the proof of what you're actually putting into practice? So there's a much higher degree of scrutiny and seriousness that goes with it. Again, I think Patagonia is a really interesting example. It's maybe the ideal, but I think one of the challenges is now we still have so many companies that don't even have a net zero plan. So how do we get everyone in the market, to move faster, adhering to agreed societal values instead of just kind of the outliers that are doing that?
And how do you both leverage partnerships? Kathryn, you talked about partnerships earlier. What does that systems lens approach, what does that ecosystem approach look like? Are you partnering with other players in your industry and beyond?
So we certainly are, and in a number of areas. And as I was listening to Paul there, I was just thinking, these times are calling for innovative approaches and perhaps different partnerships than what have, again, been traditionally done. I wanted to share two quick examples. You can ask more, but one actually on our Abbott fund side, where we have been really looking to address health equity disparities for people living with diabetes. And in the city of Stockton, California, one of the most diverse cities in the United States, there's a particularly high prevalence of diabetes. And here we have partnered, really thinking about, again, that question of access with what might not seem like some traditional partners to address diabetes, right? Because we've really thought about, what are, again, those social determinants of health for people living with diabetes? What are their barriers to treatment? Well, it's everything from transportation to get to, the medical clinic. Then at the clinic, are there enough healthcare workers who are trained and able to treat them? So we've partnered with first El Concilio, a social worker company that helps with transportation, then with the University of the Pacific to set up a certification program. And we have healthcare workers that are getting trained and then coming back into the community to work. Think about then, they're monitoring their diabetes, they go home, they live in a food desert. We've been partnering with the food bank to get them, boxes of food that are set up with recipes for people, that are helpful for diabetes and managing that. So kind of all along thinking about access from the kind of 360 approach, we've formed this network of partners across, transportation, across healthcare, across education for the healthcare workers, across the hub to kind of connect it all together. And so it really has been a very different, approach than how we might traditionally have tackled that. The other I'll just touch very quickly on is, we spoke about some of those other considerations that have not gone away. And one area where that is true is around clinical trials and sort of the lack traditionally of diversity in the type of people that are able to participate in a clinical trial. And as a result of that, we often have, therapies coming out that, you know, have been underrepresented in the research for different groups, whether that is women or people from different cultural and diverse clinical trial backgrounds. And again, as we've looked to partner to address that, we have done so by funding, you know, scholarships in HCBUs and minority nursing organizations to help those future trial leaders and clinicians come through. You know, we've looked at having an advisory board that's made up of different partners, you know, that can help do that. So again, it's kind of convening together the right partners for what you're trying to solve, rather than saying, oh, these are usually the people we bring to the table, now let's try to find a solution. And I think coming back to an earlier point I made, the only way of doing that is going to be about, you know, listening and talking with the people, you know, getting very close to the problem and the real life situation, and then helping build that solution and co-creating together. It's certainly not about just amassing people and saying, okay, you know, what do we think would be, you know, the best solution?
And you're touching indirectly on this idea of power dynamics, right? So how do you go into communities where, you know, you're not from the community, you have a different educational background per se, you may have a different ethnic or racial background, and these are complex places with, you know, not just challenges but also rich cultural history. And so, how do we think about ways that we go into those communities? You know, Paul, I'm thinking about education, and obviously there are a number of conversations happening around what should education look like in this global context, and increased access where we celebrate other cultures as well. And so, you know, both across education and health and other industries, what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. Hold on here. I'm just had a battery malfunction there. Hold on. Bear with me 1 second. So first, let me talk about culture in a slightly different approach, and that's you know, we think ethnic in particular a lot of times, or even gender. You know, from a cultural point of view, making sure that we actually have sorry, here I'm really concerned about the battery. The battery looks like it just unplugged for a second, so just give me 1 second.
Sure.
You don't mind.
Absolutely. We'll take a pause here and we'll go back to Kathryn then, and then we'll come back to you as you sort out the battery issues. You know, Kathryn, how, you know, the Stockton example is a great example, right? It's obviously a very rich cultural community. And so as you went in, how did you find the partners? What were some of the considerations you had? And as these partnerships filter back to Abbott, how do you directly and indirectly engage in a culturally appropriate way?
Yeah, that is such an important question. And, you know, the answer to that, I think, is multifaceted. It really has been about seeking out, you know, I think seeking out organizations who are already embedded within the community. And, you know, I mentioned a few of them, but there are many more, because, you know, there is such a culturally diverse community that we want to be working with people who are living in the community, who are speaking the same language, who have understanding, you know, of some of the maybe reticence, or, you know, particularly the barriers around why someone may not have sought treatment, or may not, you know, even feel like they're able to benefit from some of the things that we have put in place. And, you know, I think it's really having that sort of 360 view. You know, we could go in saying diabetes is a medical problem to treat, but it is so much more than a medical problem, right? It is a part of a whole person living in, you know, their full community. So, you know, I think it is about really taking your time, about finding the right partners, and then working together to say, what are the gaps? So, you know, one organization we work with, Apsara, they provide healthcare workers that have one-on-one conversations with patients. You know, many of their healthcare workers have now taken part in this diabetes certification program. So it's helped raise some of their understanding while they're still able to have the important connection that they do. And, you know, I as I say, it's kind of listening to people and really understanding what those struggles are, I met with a couple of patients and they just talked about the inevitability of diabetes. It wasn't something that they thought, could either really be prevented or managed. It's just always been part of, what's happened in their family, and you grow up and as part of that, you get diabetes. So, hearing that, you're thinking, how we need to approach this is really, a different approach, and it's working across those social determinants of health. The last thing I'll say is we see if John, if I can come back on, it's also then looking to say, where can you be part of helping address, that there are more people from underrepresented groups who are trained in different areas. And one of the areas, that we've really looked at is around STEM education, just knowing that it's a very underrepresented area coming through the pipeline for the types of jobs that we need in Abbott and that the healthcare industry needs. And so, again, we've really set very intentional goals about increasing the number of internships, the number of programs, and particularly for underrepresented groups, to give those opportunities. And we hear all the time, right through our high school internship program through to college, saying it made a huge difference to get mentored by somebody that looks like me, right? I being able to come in, work with a scientist, work with an engineer, and have this possibility that I might not have had otherwise, can set up people, to really pursue that. And then that's also helping, address that pipeline gap along the way as well.
That's so helpful, Kathryn. Thank you. And I think it's a great point around mentorship, making sure that people are supported in their journeys, thinking about having a robust pipeline. While we wait for Paul to get back on, I'm just wondering if Julie or Bobby want to share a little bit about your joint initiative with Just Capital and others, thinking about racial equity and the lens of corporations and how we might, support these various types of initiatives across sectors. Oh, and we have Paul. Fantastic. Paul, thank you so much. I'm sorry that you had some technical challenges. We were just talking about power dynamics and how those play out in terms of, not just reaching out to communities for, different initiatives, but also how it plays out on an organizational level. So how do you make sure your corporation, your industry, and beyond are able to take in diverse talents? And Kathryn was pointing out about, the lack of healthcare workers from diverse backgrounds and the role that STEM education can play. And so I was just, wondering if you wanted to touch upon credentialing and different pathways and other ways that we could address some of these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, thank you for that. Access, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, these have been topics that have been kind of pigeonholed as more of a compliance issue. And a little bit, again, I'll kind of relate this back to shared value initiative, the idea of, giving back to society or doing something of societal or environmental impact was seen as in competition to shareholder value, to profitability and growth. In the same way, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is now seen as an advantage that helps an organization, a team, a society drive innovation. And again, there's a whole body of research, take the time and dig into that. But on a very practical level, just before I had those wonderful battery problems, thank you, technology. One of the things that I've been very proud that Pearson had done, they have a program called the Pearson Campus Ambassadors. So while we again think of cultural diversity, gender diversity, age diversity, and sort of life experience, college students are part of the Pearson program, both as a pulse and a sounding board for new programs and products that go into to the colleges, but then are also part of the design. So like Pearson Plus, for example, campus ambassadors and students were a critical part of that design of the product and of the service. And so I think whatever business that you're in, your healthcare, education, or anything else, you have to look at your clients not as someone that you're doing something to or for, but that you're doing something with. So involve them and represent society within your whole, from design and envisioning right through to production and delivery in that as well. One of the other real quick examples I want to give of a difference in partnership, Pearson also just recently announced just a couple of weeks ago, strategic partnership with One Young World, or the One Young World Academy. And again, part of this came out of research that Pearson had done on megatrends around what's called the Global Learner Survey, showing that most people didn't feel that they were getting climate and environmental education in school, and they see a dire need and they want that. And so looking at these new courses that are being developed, that are going to be rolled out in early 2023, instead of just, here's a donation to One Young World, go and do a program, it's being co-designed, co-developed with the young professionals that are going to be availing of that program, but then powered with all of the expertise that Pearson has in designing courses to be most effective and most affordable in that as well. So it's not a donation, it's not a CSR partnership, it's a strategic partnership for growth as well as it is for the social and environmental impact as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to know that young people now make up the majority of the workforce, right? So millennials and Gen Z are now the majority of the workforce. And, particularly in the States, we know that minorities are the new majority, right? And so we really are talking about, it's so important to think about what your organization looks like, what your relationship with customers looks like, right? DEI is not something that companies can afford to ignore, and it's definitely not a nice to have. It's really a strategic advantage for companies to have individuals, who are listened to, who are part of the innovation process, who comprise really the majority of who they're trying to serve. So I think these are great examples. I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A. We have a really robust set of questions. And I think before I jump into some of them, there is one that really jumped out at me in terms of, can we be more ambitious? How can we be more ambitious? And so wanted to have that answered first before we go into some of the more technical ones.
Was that the full question, Noah?
It was really about, net zero targets waiting until 2030. But I think, in terms of what would the next level of your industry's work look like? Obviously, I think both of your corporations and the organizations that you work with are really leading edge, but how could we collectively be more ambitious in our targets towards equity and as it relates to other societal and environmental challenges?
You want to field that one first, Kathryn?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think that we see right now that it is a time when companies are weighing up sort of what I spoke about earlier on, right? This sort of that there is a lot of short-term need and change that needs to happen, with also balancing that with sort of this longer term strategic thinking. And you tend to see from where I sit, a couple of types of companies, those that are going to set very ambitious goals, not always with a clear pathway, but say, okay, if we can put this out there and then kind of drive towards it, and hopefully we'll get close, right? That sort of shoot for the moon and then you'll land in the stars kind of approach. And then I think, you equally have companies that are saying, we want to set targets. We want to make sure we do things that we know, we can achieve, and we have a clear roadmap. And so, I think it is a little bit to sort of the character and the personality of a company in a way. But then also, I think it is really important to come back to purpose and think about, for you as an organization, where is the area you can make the biggest difference, and how do you double down on that? and perhaps an ambitious goal can really be part of that. And I think, when you take a look at our 2030 sustainability plan, that's the approach we've taken. We've said we're a healthcare company. Who else, you're right, in the healthcare space? We need to step up and have a very ambitious goal about the number of lives that we can touch. We also need many other goals around all the other important considerations, and let's set them in a way that we can work towards and track them and know that we're delivering on them. So I definitely think there is room for ambition. I would say bring it back to purpose, and then it's important to not sort of cut yourself short on that, because there are a lot of other important aspects.
Yeah. And no, I'll just throw in one more quick. I think as well, beyond the cliche of collaboration and coalition, we see in corporate in particular, there's a lot of risk aversity. And for all of the talk of innovation, it's really hard for an individual organization to lead, because shareholders and everyone else is waiting to see, are you going to sink or swim? So I think the industry sector approaches where you can actually kind of knock down the competition and look at collaboration within industry to drive transformation within industries. I'll do a shout out for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I think they've done really stellar work bringing industries together to transform. More along that lines, I think, will accelerate us, because it de-risks for any one CEO or leadership team or corporation, to go on their own ambitions as well, get the whole industry to move.
That's a really interesting segue to the next question, because it talks about shared value as being part of a competitive advantage. And so how do we think about lifting all boats while simultaneously, making social impact a core part of your business objective?
It's as we look at it, I think between the goals that we have, both around sort of continuing to evolve the business and address these things, as well as the important role we have in society as a corporate citizen, there seems no way actually to advance without having shared value programs in place, right? And I think that is the whole intent behind it, is that you are able to both, advance clear business priorities while hopefully really, helping need in society and being part of that solution. We've probably talked about this in a number of shared value events before, but that's the approach we've taken in Rwanda. Is we've thought about, how to bring healthcare access closer to people. So previously, people would need to walk sometimes 3 hours or more to get to the closest healthcare facility. And we've said, how can we support the government goal of bringing that within 30 minutes walking distance? So part of that is, really supporting help build health posts, help build capacity and infrastructure. Part of that also on the business side and the areas we have expertise is helping set up the right testing panel for maternal health, and what are those 4 necessary things that every expectant mother should be getting tested for while doing it. And that is a real example of shared value in action.
Fantastic. Paul, any final thoughts on that contradiction on your end before we turn it back to Shirley?
I think right back to innovation process, that there is a place for strategic philanthropy, but at the same time, when you're focused on what's the problem, what's the need, who's the recipient of products and services, and they're involved, and so you're designing the right products and services for those audiences, you're going to get the efficiency in the system. So it's good business to be focused on a shared value model. The altruism of philanthropy is nice and it's got a place, but focus on the business first and making it efficient and effective.
Thank you both. This has been a really fascinating and robust conversation, and I've really enjoyed learning about both of your organizations and the way that you think about this, not just from a kind of an individual company standpoint, but also across your industry and beyond. And so thank you both so much for your time. And I will turn it back over to Shirley. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Noah, Kathryn, Paul, for the insightful conversation. I learned a lot. Just so you all know, I used to work in global education for more than a dozen years, and so many of the lessons that you all shared really resonated with me. And I want to maybe name a few of the things that I heard, just global themes that emerged for me that I think are helpful for our audience just to capture. I mean, one of the first things I heard, I think is a theme across, is this notion that we want to really get into long-term thinking and move away from short-termism, right? And that alongside that, there's a need to have ambitious goals. And I think the question for me is, how do you cultivate a culture that values this idea of the interconnected, having ambitious goals, but also just being able to sort of drive change in the long-term process, given that sometimes we're focused on revenue generation at a quarterly level, right, on a quarterly basis, for example. I think for me, one of the more critical pieces of the conversation was around the relationship building with communities, y'all. I think this notion of being in relationship with the problem, right? In the shared value, we have a Centering Equity and Corporate Purpose guide, where we talk lots around how, and you all named it, right? Kathryn talked about co-creating with communities. Paul talked also about DEI and sort of how do you engage your clients and how do you sort of partner with them, right? I think to me, this is such a critical piece of sort of the learnings to drive innovation and change and centering equity, is to really listen, have a humble sense of where you're headed, and then being able to sort of then aggregate from what you're hearing from communities and sort of make adjustments, innovate, et cetera. I think one of the things that we kind of scratched the surface on, but didn't tease out, and I'm loving, and I'm hoping that we have follow-up conversations to get into it's around the enabling conditions, right? I think you'll, the level of initiatives, the sort of programs that you all illuminated are amazing and fantastic. And I think it's clear that you've all done so much to sort of galvanize folks within to sort of be able to do this. And I think for many folks who are leaders in different companies, what they're asking themselves is, what is the culture that I need to have in place to be able to develop these kind of innovations? How do we ensure that people are feeling comfortable about taking risks, about piloting, about testing? How do you bring buy-in from your C-suite and your senior leadership team? How do you not only just test, but you measure progress over time so that, again, it doesn't feel incremental, so that it feels ambitious? And I think some of those things, like developing that sort of leadership buy-in culture within, it's a whole set of other challenges. And it really is something that is needed in order to drive innovation. So I think, in the Shared Value Initiative, I'm hoping that we have other conversations that are around these enabling conditions. But again, just thank you very much, Kathryn, Paul, Noah. I think it was a really rich conversation. And before we close, I want to let all of you know about two upcoming Shared Value Initiative virtual events that are taking place. First, on October 11th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, we will have a leadership discussion on economic inclusion featuring speakers from Truist, Walmart, and 110. They will explore how the private sector can advance greater economic inclusion through clarity of purpose, as well as programs, policies, practices, and partnerships. The second event will happen on November 29th at 10:30 Eastern. We'll have Novartis CEO Narasimhan in conversation with Ellingstad Chantel, Fortune's editor-in-chief. They will be discussing leadership and a reimagined approach to equity. You hear about how change happens in an unbossed culture and how it impacts people's lives and longevity. And details and registration for this all is on the sharedvalue.org. And then I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors once more for supporting the speaker series. I also want to send a huge shout out and a huge hug and gratitude to many of the folks who are working behind the scenes to make this webinar possible, including Georgie Eckerd, Emily Moschler, Gail Gershon, and Bobby Stilton. And thank you to you, our audience. We hope you found this session valuable, and we really look forward to seeing you at another Shared Value Initiative event soon. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Take care.